Hi, I'm going to read the final chapter in the book Answer to Job, component of, it's an essay written by Carl Jung in about 1958, I believe it was. Yes, copyright published, Bollingen Foundation, 1958. Occurred 8 years after the Assumption of Mary, which Jung writes about in this book as a very inspiring, notable event that takes place within the Catholic division of Christianity. He wrote about, I could actually read another letter he wrote in the volume C.G. Jung Letters 1906 to 1950, several years prior to the assumption of that doctrine or dogma in the Catholic, in Roman Catholicism, where he was responding in a letter to a Catholic who had written him. It's a very long letter and it's really insightful, and it would probably make for a really good video, so maybe I'll even include it in this. Here is chapter 20, the final chapter, concluding Answer to Job. It will probably have become clear to the reader that the account I have given of the development of the symbolic entities corresponds to a process of differentiation of human consciousness. But since, as I showed in the introduction, the archetypes in question are not mere objects of the mind, but are also autonomous factors, i.e., living subjects, the differentiation of consciousness can be understood as the effect of the intervention of the transcendentally conditioned dynamisms. In this case, it would be the archetypes that accomplish the primary transformation. But since, in our experience, there are no psychic conditions which could be observed through introspection outside the human being, the behavior of the archetypes cannot be investigated at all without the interaction of the observing consciousness. Therefore, the question as to whether the process is initiated by consciousness or by the archetype can never be answered, unless, in contradiction to experience, one either robbed the archetype of its autonomy or degraded consciousness to a mere machine. We find ourselves in best agreement with psychological experience if we concede to the archetype a definite measure of independence, and to consciousness a degree of creative freedom proportionate to its scope. There then arises that reciprocal action between two relatively autonomous factors, which compels us, when describing and explaining the processes, to present sometimes the one and sometimes the other factor as the acting subject, even when God becomes man. The Christian solution has hitherto avoided this difficulty by recognizing Christ as the one and only God-man. But the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the third divine person, in man, brings about a Christification of many. And the question then arises whether these many are all complete God-men. Such a transformation would lead to insufferable collisions between them, to say nothing of the unavoidable inflation to which the ordinary mortal, who is not freed from original sin, would instantly succumb. In these circumstances, it is well to remind ourselves of St. Paul and his split consciousness. On one side, he felt he was the apostle directly called and enlightened by God, and on the other side, a sinful man who could not pluck out the thorn in the flesh and rid himself of the satanic angel who plagued him. That is to say, even the enlightened person remains what he is, and is never more than his own limited ego before the One who dwells within him, whose form has no knowable boundaries, and who encompasses him on all sides, fathomless as the abysms of the earth and vast as the sky. Very eloquent way of concluding a rather extremely complicated essay. Very deep, at least being the first book of Carl Jung that I ever read. It's not an easy. Well, it's like I jumped in head first into the deep end before I could even learn how to swim. But yeah, Carl Jung really had this book is exceptional. It's written as an answer to Job, and it describes the process of, like, the first 20 pages of approximately 100. First 20% of the book is one chapter on the subject of Job and Yahweh, and Jung just Jung has not a nice thing to say about Yahweh. Quite a defender of Job, and then he flips it and he talks about so many. He goes back and forth, and it's sort of like a yin yang. He's playing devil's advocate back and forth, and what role does Satan play? What role does Jesus play? And all the other characters involved, the prophecies of Ezekiel and Enoch, and the interpretation of various feminine positions, like wisdom, so the Sophia, the wisdom role, and hypothesized Lilith and Eve for Adam, and it just goes through so many different topics. But basically in the end, it's all about just us being people. So that's it for now.